How amazing is it that we have a God who loves you during those years where you adamantly deny, loud and proud deny him, he loves you. I think that's pretty incredible.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Tried and Truly podcast. You're tuned in to episode 12, and our guest today is mom, wife, and blogger Living A Goode, and she joined us to talk about her journey of finding faith.
Michelle, as I was reflecting on our time that we shared with Erica, I was really struck because her story is so interesting, and it made me think about the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son, which is found in Luke 15:11. And it's amazing to me because Jesus's ministry was 3 years. And he knew that we were prone to wander. So he specifically addressed that. He gave us the answer to that wandering. And the story is about a rich father who has 2 sons, and one stays and obeys and the other wanders.
Right. And Erica's story is so similar to that in that, you know, she strayed at times and felt far from God, but when she returned home to him, he welcomed her with open arms. And it's such a good lesson that, you know, no matter how far we feel from God or how long it's been, he will always welcome us with loving arms and celebrate us as if we were with him all along. So let's jump right into our conversation with Erica. So Erica, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you as a guest because you and I actually go back a long ways, like over 10 years ago, pre-marriage, pre-kids in our glamorous world of internal audit, public accounting. And although we never worked too close together, I always remember seeing you in the office or wherever it was. You just always had a big smile on your face. And I was always like, that girl looks so fun. I want to know her. So as it turns out, 10 years later, we have somewhat of a similar path that we forged in terms of leaving public accounting, leaving the corporate environment, becoming stay-at-home moms. And then also we have a similar background in our journey of finding faith, which you have a blog called Living A Goode Life, and you wrote about your finding faith journey on your blog. So we're going to talk about that today, among other things. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I don't remember smiling that much in public accounting, so I'm glad that you remember that.
It was probably on the way out the door.
Probably. At the end of busy season.
Yeah, exactly.
And Erica, speaking of your blog, I have been feasting on it. I love it. It's so much fun. You write about faith and family and, like Michelle said, the transition from corporate America to stay at home and in this super fun and witty way. And so I really enjoy that about your blog.
Thanks so much.
But you made the recent decision to pick up your family and move across country. And Michelle told me that your nearest McDonald's is like over an hour away. So I need to know, how did this happen and what is your life like in Idaho?
Well, my nearest everything is an hour away. That's not just McDonald's, but we live in a tiny town tiny compared to where I used to. I'm from Chicago. And so I've lived in and around Chicago all of my life. And actually that's the story starts back in public accounting days, which is where I met my husband, who is from Idaho. He was working in our company's Boise office and I was working in our company's Chicago office and hit it off, and the rest is history. And he moved to Chicago and we were there for 10 plus years of our marriage, and an opportunity came up to go back to his home state, and we thought it was the right thing to do. It felt like the right thing. And so here we are in this tiny town that he grew up in southeast Idaho. We're about 2.5 hours north of Salt Lake City, about 4 hours. Everybody thinks we moved to Boise because that's the only city in Idaho.
Yeah. And that's the only one I knew. I was like, oh yeah, Boise, Idaho.
So we're 4 hours east of Boise. So we're practically in Utah and Wyoming, and we're surrounded by potato fields and wheat fields. But there's a grocery store here and schools and there's a little library.
That's awesome. Well, I've seen the pictures of your life in Idaho with your sweet family, and it looks absolutely beautiful. Mm-hmm. So, Erica, in your blog, you recently wrote a 4-part series on your finding faith journey. And your first post talks about your experience growing up in the church, but never really finding that personal connection to your faith. And I really related to your experience of growing up, attending church often. For me, I went twice a week, every Thursday with my Catholic school and then with my family on Sundays. And I know you wrote you spent Saturday and Sunday morning in church. So at least I got to spread my church outings out a little bit.
I was a public school kid, so I had to go on the weekends.
Yeah. So we both spent a lot of time in church, doing all the right church things, saying all the prayers, checking the boxes. But I never felt a deep connection to God. I don't even think I knew it was something that was attainable, that I could even have. So I want to know how was your experience growing up, and how do you think it impacted your faith journey?
Yeah. So I grew up in the Catholic Church. I was a public school kid, but I went to, if you know the terminology, I went to CCD on the weekends on Saturday, and then we were in church on Sunday. And I did all of the things, but I never felt like I got it. Is this what this is? I just have to do the next step. And it always felt like a bunch of next steps. And I never felt any spiritual connection to anything. And so I went to college and it all went away. There was no part of it that stuck. The people I was hanging out with didn't help that. I didn't know, I wasn't hanging out with a church crowd anyways. I never stepped foot in church in college unless I was coming back home to visit family for Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
It felt like nothing stuck in my childhood. I always felt like I did it wrong. I must have missed something, or I don't know, I wasn't doing it right, because I watched other people and they seemed like they got it. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But
yeah,
I didn't get it. And I felt like I was missing something. And I kind of lived like that for a number of years through college and then out of college.
Well, Erica, you're absolutely not alone in that feeling that maybe not a lot stuck from your childhood faith, or that you didn't really get it. Because like I said, I really related to your story of feeling like, you missed something or something didn't stick. I like to joke that the only thing that really stuck from my childhood faith was the McDonald's fish sandwiches that we would eat every Friday during Lent. And I still love those things. And it's one of my top pregnancy cravings. But in my mind, like you said, you went off to college and you kind of left all the aspects of religious life at home. I felt kind of the same. And now as an adult looking back, when I think about the time I spent in church, the time growing up learning about my faith and really seeing how important it was to my parents, I think those were all tiny little seeds, being planted in my life. And the Bible talks a lot about planting seeds. And in Luke 8, Jesus tells us the parable of a farmer who sows seed. And he goes on to explain that the seed that is sown is the word of God. And along the way, seeds are sown, but those who hear it might receive it differently. It might not take root. It might be distracted from by the pleasures of the world. There's a lot of different reasons, maybe why it didn't grow at that time. But Paul reminds us in Corinthians 3:7 that neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but the one who makes them grow is God.
I love
and
that.
So, yeah, it's our parents, the church, our religious education, those are all seeds that were planted and watered. And Erica, for you and I, buckets of water were being doused on our heads, and we just weren't getting it, or for whatever reason, it wasn't sticking with us. But the seeds were planted, and in time, God did make those grow into something beautiful that we have, So I think it's a good lesson that it's our job to keep planting those seeds, and it's not up to us if they grow. God is the one who makes them grow. So looking back, I can see all those seeds that were planted in my life, and I feel really grateful for those. But Erica, after college, what do you think was the turning point for you in beginning to find your faith?
Yeah, it wasn't really until I met my husband that he kind of introduced me to his church. It's ironically the church we go to now in his small town. It was just different. And for sure I was different. And it was just started this journey of figuring out. I was still uneasy about it, but I needed to figure something out, especially as we started having kids. Clearly my husband has a solid faith. And I don't know what I believe. And so it was this kind of like, well, I have to do right by my kids. And that was kind of the impetus of starting to figure it out and doing it for my kids. It was this kind of journey for myself of like just honestly turning to God and kind of being open to it. Yeah. In the Finding Faith blog series that I have, it's 4 parts. And the first part talks about the childhood upbringing and kind of all those feelings I had and how I easily let go of it in college. And then the second part talks about prayer. And I was never big into prayer. Like it never made logical sense to me how could one God hear a world's worth of prayers? And surely if he could hear mine had to have been less important than the children starving in Africa or people facing abuse or something like that. Like in my very human logical brain, no matter how old I was, it just never made sense to me. And if it didn't make sense to me, well, then I couldn't believe it. Right.
Right. Well, and I don't know if you were the same, but growing up, I recited prayers. The idea of just praying as a form of just talking to God was a new concept to me.
Agreed. Yeah, total. And not that I don't think that idea wasn't there, but maybe it just didn't land with me or I didn't get it. I'm not sure. But there was a instance where actually as my grandma was passing away and I didn't know if anybody was going to pray for her. She was a devout Catholic, always was, loved the Pope. And where that wasn't connecting with me anymore, I still respected her faith in that direction and I respected her beliefs. And so as she was dying, I went to go visit her on the night she passed, all by myself. And I recited those memorized prayers because I knew that was important to her. And so I went there and I was all by myself. She was by herself, obviously in the hospital, and she was not conscious. I don't know if she knew I was there. I would like to think she knew I was there, but she wasn't responsive. And so I prayed, the Our Father, and I prayed the Hail Mary over her out loud, so that she could hear it if she could hear me. And then I said goodbye to her and left. And then what happened next was, for the first time ever, I sat in my car and I prayed like you just talked about. And I prayed like a conversation with God. That was actually real ugly. I had never done that before. And it was a whole bunch of tears and boogers and a whole bunch of actually like demanding God, which, I mean, God is God. I can't demand him to do anything. But in that moment, that was like, God, you have to take her. Like, it is her time to go. Like this, she is done. Like she has been here. She is good. Like, and I prayed that way. And so that was an interesting kind of turn of events where it was this prayer life that was from my childhood. And then I walked out to my car and had this new prayer life where I had never prayed like that before. And so that was very messy after I cleaned up the face. You know how that goes. I drove home. I drove to the grocery store. And as I was leaving the grocery store, my mom calls and she goes, did you see Grandma tonight? And I said, yeah, I said goodbye to her. Yeah, I did. She goes, was she alive when you saw her? And I was like, yes, she was alive. Like, yes, I know what an alive person looks like. She was alive. She's like, well, she just passed away. We just got here. She's gone. She was gone when we got here. And so what had happened was, from the time that I had
God answered your prayer. That's what happened.
Yeah, and I did. And so like, I nearly dropped my phone because I believed in a God who didn't hear my prayers. And I didn't know how that made sense. And that was new to me. Wow. That was the night where the idea that God could hear me was a new idea to me.
And that's like the pivotal point where you went from a person with religion to a person with relationship with God. And I really feel like we can quickly be like, okay, here's the list of prayers. Here's show up to church every Sunday. That means you're a good Christian. Make sure you do your 10% tithing. So we take a relationship and we completely distort it because we as humans, like, nothing in life is free. So we assume like salvation isn't free either. Like, there has to be something we have to do to earn. And so it's like we put our own rules in place, our own checklist, right? If you want to be successful, in this career, do A, B, and C. Well, if I want to be as successful, in my faith, I need to do A, B, and C. We want that checklist because it feels comfortable.
Gives me something to do. It shows me that I've accomplished something. And the point is, like, there's nothing to accomplish. Like, Jesus has accomplished it. The end. Nothing you can do can make God love you less, and nothing you can do can make God love you more. That doesn't mean we don't do anything, but if we choose to accept it, it's already all there for us. It's a free gift. We're very uncomfortable with free gifts.
Okay, Erica, you mentioned your 4 blog posts about finding faith, which I love them, and I read them a couple times. I connected on several different levels because I too was a drifter for many, many years, and really unsure of what I believed until a pivotal moment in my life. And you had one, I think, sitting in a hospital patient registrar's office where you're faced with the decision, are you or not? Are you or are you not a Christian? Will you tell us that story?
Yes, it is not. That is not the moment I thought it was going to be. I thought, but that's how God does things. Isn't he? He likes to surprise us with unexpected circumstances. This was not a crazy medical situation. I had found a lump on the back of my neck. I went to my annual checkup just to talk with my doctor, like, hey, I have this thing on the back of my neck. Are you concerned? And she's like, I'm not really concerned. It looks like a lymph node, but we should probably make sure it's not lymphoma. Like, we'll get you a chest x-ray just to, like, double check. But I'm not concerned. And I was like, okay. And this story doesn't end with me having lymphoma. Like, this is not part of the story. This is just what got me into the building. It's totally still there. It's still a lump. It's just existing on my neck.
I kind of want to see
it. Well, it's a lot smaller now.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was from carrying a heavy purse. I know, that terrible is that. I switched purses and I was like, oh, this is feeling much better now. Anyway, so I went to I had to go get admitted into the hospital just like on a random day after this doctor's appointment to get a chest x-ray. And I go to the receptionist at the hospital building and she's like asking me all the questions. They had most of my information, but she was asking me all the questions. And she gets to, what religion are you? Which is a normal hospital question. Like, they have a box that they like to put you down in case you need something, they can have somebody come visit you. She goes, religion. And I was like, I'm sorry, come again? Because I was not expecting it. And she was like, religion, do you want to put down a religion? And like, my eyes got real big because what she didn't know was, like, I was in this journey of God discovery. I won't say self-discovery because I was just, as a self, I was just confused. And so I was on this path with God and trying to figure out who God was and all of that. And she had no idea. And so she asked this, and all the times before that in my life, I would have said Catholic, I would have said atheist, I would have said none, I would have said all these things. And that day, none of those felt right. And it was that moment where this is all going on in my head while this woman is staring at me. And I was like, either, like, in my head, I thought, either I believe in Jesus or I don't believe in Jesus. Either I believe what Jesus said or I don't believe what Jesus said. It's as simple as that. There's 2 questions there. And I looked at her and I said, Christian, put me down as Christian. Like, in that moment, I accepted him. And I said, put me down as Christian. And she was like, okay, but what kind? I was like, you don't know what just happened in my head.
Ruined my moment.
I know. And I was like, what do you mean, what kind? And I said, the kind that believes in Jesus. And I was a little more spicy. Like, she had no idea what was going on, and I probably come off more spicy than I should have. And I was like, the kind that believes in Jesus, that kind of Christian. And she was like, yes, but like, what denomination? And like, the journey I'd been on is like, it didn't have to be a denomination. There just had to be Jesus. And so when she asked me that, I was like, we had been going to church and I didn't even know what kind of church we were going to because I didn't want to ask, because I didn't want to know, because I didn't want to distract from God. Like, the denomination didn't matter. Me figuring out God mattered. And so she's looking at me. She's like, denomination. And I was like, the building just so happened to be next to our new church. And there just so happened to be a window next to the woman. And so more forcefully than I should have, I go, I don't know what kind of Christian, the kind that goes to that church. And I pointed out the window. And she turned and looked over her shoulder and she goes, oh, you're non-denominational. Okay, here's your paperwork. Go have a seat. I was like, I wanted to cry and I wasn't sat down. And I was like, what just happened?
Oh my gosh.
But yes, what just happened was like, I literally just accepted Jesus in my head and defined it and figured it out. And that was the moment. And this poor woman who was sitting at the hospital receptionist desk had no idea that like, she just heard my testimony.
Oh, that's so funny.
I love that. I have a similar story, but in a slightly different way. When I was 19, so I was, still not really strong in my faith, but I had enlisted in the military. And so day one on boot camp, like I could tell you so many details, but like they just sleep deprive you, right? For like days going through all of the different checkpoints and physicals and all of this stuff. Well, one of the days, I don't know if it was the first day or the third day, but one of the days we got our dog tags. And so I'm sitting there, in front of the person across from me, and they did the exact same thing. They were like, do you have a religion? And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm in the military now. I might like have to go to war and die. So yes, you can mark me down. I'll be a Christian. And he said the same thing. Well, what kind? I was like, well, I don't know what kind, like, what are my options? So we started scrolling through and I was like, growing up in my small town, like we have 2 large Mennonite churches, large again for 800 people. And so I was like, well, just put me down as a Mennonite. And he was like scrolling. He's like, there's not a Mennonite. There's not an option for it. And I'm like, there's no Mennonite? And he's like, how about a Methodist? And I'm like, yeah,
Sure.
That's close enough. Because alphabetically,
They're like
it
the
was
same
close
thing.
enough, right? So to this day, my military dog tags say that I'm Methodist. And I've never been into a Methodist church. What I didn't know is that one of the tenets or core beliefs of the Mennonite faith is that they believe in peace and not war and not military.
Why it's not an option there. You were their first Mennonite.
The Navy's first female Mennonite. All right. So when you were telling the story about when you professed your faith to the lady at the hospital, the patient registrar, you said that any other day you probably would have said no or atheist to the religion. I'm just curious. It seems like you've always been a believer, even when you strayed, even when you were drifting with your faith, because you even mentioned like you really wanted to find a faith, a church for your kids. Do you feel like you really were an atheist, or that like you really didn't believe, or that you were just struggling with it?
I would say in college, I would have told anybody who asked I was atheist during college. And that's an ugly thing to say, but I think it's an honest thing to say. I was just done with it and it didn't mean anything to me and I didn't get it. So I didn't believe it and I just walked away from it. And I was like super loud and proud atheist in college, which is part of the story because I think it shows you that God redeems everybody, right? Like no matter where you've been, what you've believed or not believed, like I can see now that in those years of college, God didn't stop loving me. How amazing is it that we have a God who loves you during those years where you adamantly deny, loud and proud deny him, he loves you.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty incredible.
It is. Nothing that we can say changes the love that God has for us, regardless if we are in a place in our relationship with him to recognize that we are his or not.
So, Erica, you wrote about in your blog series how you had a hard time getting into the Bible. And I think for a lot of people, and definitely for me, growing up, I didn't really read the Bible. And it can be an intimidating thing and it can be confusing and you kind of don't know where to start. But you wrote that you read the Bible. Did you do it in a year or like?
I did a 1-year program and it took me 3 years. Let's just be honest. The Bible's scary. Like it's a big, intimidating book. I don't know about yours. Mine's got like 1,600 pages in it. And that is just intimidating. And you think you start on page 1, but sometimes starting on page 1 isn't the right answer. And so, I was just after that point when my grandma passed, and I kind of had this like, oh my gosh, God can hear me. Like, I need to know more about God. And it was this determination after, for so many years, I had been scared and intimidated and confused by the Bible, that I was like, well, I'm done fearing the unknown. If I'm going to be afraid and confused, at least let me know what I'm afraid and confused at. And so it was really just a sheer determination of like, I'm going to read every single word of this, and then at least I'll know what I'm afraid of or that I don't understand. And I did it. And it was like, I probably had more questions after reading it than I did before, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. And I wasn't confused by what was in it anymore.
I want you to tell me more about your husband, because he seems really sweet.
Well, he's married. I'm just kidding.
That's awesome. But what I was going to ask you about is, you had said like he is always strong in his faith, right? And you wanted to like re-explore a relationship with Jesus as an adult after you had kids. So was that an issue, a topic, or anything as you guys were dating and in your early stages of your marriage?
God picks our spouses. He's like the perfect person for me. And he's just this
Obviously,
really
yes.
easygoing. Yes. He's just this easygoing, non-confrontational guy. And like, he would never push it,
Yeah.
you know, and he would just always give grace. And that was just exactly what I needed. And I needed time and grace. And I also was very, very quiet about what was going on in my own head and like all the questions I had. Like, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed to be so confused.
Were you embarrassed because you wanted to like revisit, like, let me go back now and see if I really do, you know, believe in this God thing? Or was it the homecoming you were embarrassed about?
I was embarrassed that like I didn't know it. Like, I was 20 something and I went to church all my childhood. Like, I should know this. I shouldn't be confused. Nobody else is confused. Like, why am I different? Like, why don't I get this? Especially because he didn't have a similar upbringing. I was just ashamed that like I should know this.
Well, and I love that how you describe how he treated you throughout your confusion. He essentially modeled Jesus's love by treating you with grace and not forcing it down your throat. It's a good lesson for how we're going to raise our kids in the same way of answering their questions about faith, and like, how do we bring them up to not feel like we're forcing them to do religion, but that we're inviting them into this beautiful relationship with Jesus that we are so blessed to have. You know, I see like my 7-year-old sometimes he says, how do I know God is real? And I say to him, you know, God lives in us. He dwells within us. He's in your heart. He's like, well, that doesn't make sense, Mom. I don't see him in my heart. You know, he's asking all these questions. And so each conversation is like an opportunity for me to say, either this is true because it's in the Bible and you just believe it, or I can have grace and act like your husband did and not force it. And how do you approach it with your kids, Erica?
I'm super honest about like their questions. And now even today, I feel like I'm not afraid to answer questions anymore, but I'm also really honest when like, I don't have a good answer for you. And sometimes we just have to believe in faith. Like, one of the questions we get a lot at home is like, but where was God before the world was created? And you're just like, oh, okay.
Do you want a snack, honey?
I don't have a good answer for you on that one. But I'm always open and honest with questions, and your kids can't read your mind. I'm not sure if you know this, but there's so much that we think and believe and have thoughts in our own head. And unless we verbalize that, like, our kids don't know what I'm thinking. So for example, like, we have beautiful sunrises here. We are blessed with like the most beautiful sunrises every morning. And I just make a point to be like, hey kids, look what God just did outside. Like, look at that beautiful sunrise. Isn't that such a blessing that we get to see that? Like, isn't God creative that he can make something that looks like that?
That's awesome. I love that.
It's like infusing God into your everyday instead of,
Right.
got to be something that you talk about, on the holidays or Sunday.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I don't want the kids to think that like God is just in church on Sunday or God is just in my Bible when I read it. Like, no, God is walking with us every day. And let me show you the points where I think of him or why I relate back to him in this moment.
Yeah.
Well, Erica, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a blast to get to catch up with you. And I want to encourage everyone to go check out your blog, livingagoodelife.org. Follow you on Instagram for encouragement in faith, parenting, and to get a glimpse into your life with your family in Idaho. I loved hearing your finding faith journey, and I know it's going to bless and encourage a lot of people who are on a similar path or are going through some of the same struggles that you have. So thank you so much for sharing it with us and for being here today.
If this has somehow hit home with you, or if you've struggled with this and you feel like you're alone, I am always open to have a one-on-one conversation. And in posting my Finding Faith blog series, I had a good number of people reach out to me. They've shared their stories with me, and just to feel like you're not alone in any confusion you're feeling or any shame you're feeling. There is no condemnation. You are so loved. And if you just need somebody to talk to, please DM me, send me an email. I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Tried and Truly podcast. Please subscribe and check us out at triedandtrulypodcast.com to connect with us, see our show notes, and much more. See you next time.